So, hi everyone, and thanks for listening to the Biome Podcast. We're Emma, Roby, and this week we're also talking to Stan Smith. Roby, do you want to introduce Stan?
Hello. So this week we are very lucky to have Stan Smith, who is the Wilder Landscapes Manager at the Kent Wildlife Trust, here with us today. The broad theme of this Biome episode will be the reintroduction of the European bison to a little wood in Kent, which is fantastic. So hello, Stan.
Hello, Roby and Emma.
Great.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
No, thank you so much for taking the time. Roby and I are absolutely fascinated by bison, and the project, the Wilder Blean project, is incredible. So we're really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, we are slight bison nerds, it must be said. Would you like to start off by telling us a little bit about your role at the Kent Wildlife Trust?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So as Wilder Landscapes Manager, I have a sort of two-pronged role, really. One is I look after our wilding projects, which involve bison that we're going to talk about today, but also looking at other species that could potentially be reintroduced in the future. And the other half of what I do is looking at how we engage with our sort of landowning, farming type community. So I do that as well to try to see how we can sort of link those two things together and make sure that conservation is working for everybody across the wider landscape. And the other thing, the main thing I'm going to talk about today, I think, is the fact that I'm project managing this Wilder Blean project. So very, very exciting. This is our flagship wilding project, and I can't wait to tell you all about it.
So one thing, just before we talk about the bison at Wilder Blean, which is obviously really, really super exciting, I just noticed you mentioned wilding a lot as opposed to rewilding. Is there a kind of reason behind that for you? Does that impact your conservation approach?
Yeah, it definitely does, actually. And we had a lot of discussions about this. Obviously, the rewilding movement is very in vogue at the moment. There's a lot of discussion about it. And when we were kind of thinking about this a couple of years ago and working out how Kent Wildlife Trust would kind of fit in with this, we really just felt that that re prefix is quite unhelpful because it makes you instantly think that you're looking back to some point in the past. And of course, there's a lot of debate about, when were we a most sort of natural environment? When was the most wild time? And it's quite an unhelpful thing because we're never going to be able to recreate the past. And that's not really what the aim of this is at all. What we need to do is find natural solutions and a way to integrate nature that works in the modern world. Our ecosystems are different now. We have a different climate now. So we need to find ways that work and bring nature into people's lives today. And so that idea we thought wilding is just very much helpful. It's a look to the future.
No, I think that's really interesting because obviously, like you were saying, rewilding is something at the moment that is massively taken off as kind of things that people are aware about at the moment. But yeah, that's such a good point about we can't really turn back the clock. We have to kind of work with what we have in the modern world, which is obviously different from like the Pleistocene. You can't go back and recreate that.
Exactly, yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later on in terms of the bison and the sort of the species choices that we have today. They're just different to what we had in the past as well. So yeah.
So obviously, it sounds like you really see these bison as a way to move forward with ecosystem restoration and that sort of thing. So what is actually happening at Wilder Blean with these bison? What's the whole project? Tell us about it.
Okay, the whole project, I suppose, in a nutshell, the bison there are there as ecosystem engineers, I suppose. So the site itself, we're very lucky. We have this enormous chunk of ancient woodland in Kent, the West Blean, which is it is an ancient woodland and is fantastic because we have this great big site that's one great big unit, but it's been heavily modified by man over time. A lot of it is covered in non-native conifer plantation that was done in the past before Kent Wildlife Trust took it on, and a lot of it is covered in sweet chestnut coppice, which has got benefits for some species, but is huge uniform stands of sweet chestnut coppice. And if you've seen any of the sort of the recent state of nature reports, the lack of sustainable woodland management is actually one of the 8 biggest drivers of species declines in our country. And so with such a large area to manage, and in the past we've always been doing that with kind of chainsaws and machinery that has, you know, a lot of negative impacts that come with that. We're just looking for a way to manage that wood more sustainably. And when we learned about the effects that bison are having in other projects in Europe, it was just sort of, we thought, wow, this could be a really perfect example of what we could do for the future of this woodland. And so what we're trying to do is reinstate sort of that natural processes into the woodland. The bison are just one element of that. Obviously, they're a very, very exciting element of that, and they've not been used in the UK in this way before. But it also includes other animals too, and so that we can have a kind of mixed assemblage and have all those different attributes that the different animals can bring in. So that also includes things like longhorn cows, Exmoor ponies, and pigs as well, because those pigs have that fantastic rooting behaviour that you just can't really get anywhere else. So it's about integrating all of these animals together and testing this as an approach. So we're using an approach where the bison will be in one area, in a controlled area, being compared to other species in other areas as well. We also have an area which is having traditional management as well. So we have this kind of 3 different areas where we can see and compare the different things. So we're really carefully trying to work out what are the impacts going to be on this environment. Obviously, this hasn't been done in the UK before. And we're trying to make sure that we have a really robust scientific process so that these projects can be then rolled out more widely in the future, hopefully. So we can show what the benefits are, break down those barriers, work out all the difficult bits first for everybody else, and then do that legwork. And then you can have hopefully bison in other projects in other places in the UK in the future.
So it sounds like this is your kind of first experiment. You've got your controlled traditional management, then you've got other species, and then the bison. And it sounds like this is almost like you're paving the way for other people to do this across the UK as well later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite interesting because in the past and still now, all of our conservation sites are very small. Our sort of nature reserves are set up. Our landscape is very, very fragmented across the UK, very highly developed. And so most nature reserves being so small, very intensively managed, and they need to be in certain sense to protect the sort of specific species that they have there. But what we need to do is look at how we can make solutions that kind of join this up across a much bigger area. But what this means is there's not really a framework for how to do this type of large-scale project. Wilding or rewilding doesn't really fit very neatly into kind of the current legislation that we have, the current ways in which we work. And so, yes, this project is quite challenging in that front because we're trying to work out how do you make it work within the systems that we currently have. What doesn't fit for purpose? What do we need to change? How can we work with all the different agencies, all the different people that need to be involved in this, and make a blueprint that means you can then take this and work it in other areas as well. So yeah, we're doing a lot of the hard work, coming up against a lot of the barriers in order to make it easy for everybody else. But it's very exciting.
No, it really is. And I think it's important for conservation that people have, like Roby was saying, someone paving the way, because if it's not something that's been done before, I think people are often hesitant or kind of not sure what to do. So obviously there's probably a lot of work that needs to be done between now and kind of 2022 when the bison arrive. What kind of preparations have you got that you need to make before the bison come?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there's a lot of infrastructure type work to be done. The bison themselves, the bison as a species themselves, one of the reasons we want to use them is they're so fantastic at looking after themselves. They're a very robust species. They've not been sort of domesticated in the same way as other sort of cattle and horses and that kind of thing. So it's not such a problem of them being able to find their own food. We're very confident that the bison that we get will be able to do that. It's mostly about making sure that they're safe themselves and that people are kept safe from them as well. So they are considered a dangerous wild animal in this country. And so we're making sure that we've got all of the kind of necessary fencing in place to make sure that they're kept away from the public and the public are kept away from them. So we've got to put a lot of fencing in for all of that kind of stuff. There's also other infrastructure in terms of things like you come across things about how do you deal with a public footpath? How do you deal with a public footpath when you need bison to be able to get from side A to side B and you've got people who want to be able to walk through the middle, and we want to make sure that people can still walk everywhere that they have done on those public paths. And so we've had to come up with answers to that, and that's been things like creating tunnels for bison. And we've been learning from experience. Yeah, exactly. We're learning from experience from American projects that they have tunnels for bison over there, for American bison, and also doing a lot of learning from projects in the Netherlands where they have European bison in reserves of a comparable size to where we're doing this in the UK. And they are able to manage sort of public access through those as well. So we've been learning a lot of lessons about the type of fences you need, the way you can move them around, and all the sort of the other things that bison need to survive. So we have to do a little bit of pond work, things like that, to make sure they've got enough places to drink from. It's a good site with lots of different water in different places anyway, but we're just making sure that everything is absolutely as it should be for that. So that's the kind of physical infrastructure, as well as kind of making sure there's good signage and people know where they can go when they come and visit. But also the other big thing that we want to do and are doing is talking to all of those local people who will be impacted by this project. Because obviously it's a big site, there's got lots of neighbours, and we've been speaking to all of our neighbours to make sure that they understand what's happening and how they can be involved and what this might mean for them. And so we need to listen to anybody who might have any concerns and see if we can address those through the way the project goes. So between now and 2022, we've still got a bit of time, and there's a lot more talking to people to do to tell them about how the project's going to work.
No, it does sound quite full on in terms of what you have to do, but I think it should be
big
fantastic.
Tunnels.
Yeah, the tunnel. I'm intrigued by the tunnels.
Yeah, we've still got to work out a lot of the engineering on those, but yeah, we think we've got a good way forward for that.
And so, like you were saying, obviously working with the local community is obviously vitally important. We haven't had bison in the UK. I mean, 6,000, some estimates say even 10,000 years we haven't had them here. How's the local community kind of responded? Has it been kind of a positive response to bison? That's
been a really interesting one, actually. Obviously, we'd not done this before. Nobody has, in the UK at least. And we were a little bit nervous about what people might think. And I've been absolutely bowled over by people's appreciation of this project. People really seem to want to see something new. This is a chance for this woodland to really come back to life, for people to see something that they just would get no other chance to see roaming around a woodland. And of course, people have some specific concerns about things like safety, about welfare, all sorts of other bits and pieces, which are really, really valid. But I hope, and so far, when we've explained how the project's going to work, how we're addressing all those things, everyone's been really incredibly supportive of it. And so I'm really pleased that people seem to be looking forward to Bison coming and seeing what this can bring for the local area. I mean, the other thing is there are loads of fantastic knock-on benefits for people around. I mean, the opportunities for ecotourism, for other businesses in the local area to be able to work off the kind of visitors that are come and see this. We're looking at sustainable transport options so that there isn't a sort of too much increase in cars coming towards the area, and yeah, there's just loads and loads of knock-on benefits for people. So yeah, we're really keen to continue talking to people, but so far people seem to be very happy about it. Yeah.
And for the neighbours of the Blean woodland, these obviously it's tremendously important to inform people and have consultations and really keep the local people updated every step of the way. Is it a kind of rural area, or is it quite densely populated? Is there a lot of farmland around Blean? What's the kind of the demographic, as it were, around this area?
That's a good question. Yeah, the woodland itself, sort of its direct neighbours, is, I mean, it's a block of woodland within other woodlands around it. There are other kind of woodland bits on the edges. There is some farmland. It's pretty much all arable farmland. There's not really any animal grazing going on directly next door. And then also, in addition, there are sort of houses, with gardens and things around. So it's a relatively rural setting in that kind of sense. However, it's only a few miles away from Canterbury. It's only from Canterbury City. I think it's about 5 miles or something like that as the crow flies. So it's really, really close. So it's on the doorstep of people's, a great big population of people who can come and see this and experience it. There is in fact a cycling route called the Crab and Winkle Way that goes directly from the city centre almost straight to the site. And we're just looking at how we can link up with that, so people can experience this kind of thing not far away from where they live. But the Blean is a really interesting place because it's quite sort of unknown. It's not really known as an area in itself very way. It's not a sort of designated national park. It's not designated as an area of outstanding natural beauty. But it altogether, with our site and other woodlands in the area, it's about 11 square miles. It's the largest area of woodland, of ancient woodland in southern England, pretty much. So it's just this fantastic opportunity. And it would be great to see how this project can pave the way and link up with those other projects in the future, those other woodlands, and see what could be done for the whole landscape.
Yeah, no, I think it's so exciting that this is obviously first of its kind. And I guess that all ties in, like you're saying, with the wilding aspect, kind of connecting the local people, making sure they know what's going on. Because as much as bison lovers would appreciate the bison there, I think it's important to have kind of, local engagement at all levels. And so, I mean, you mentioned about the bison kind of being ecosystem engineers and how they can kind of regulate the landscape. Will you be looking for any kind of indicators in particular, like that they're having a positive impact? Because kind of I got the impression that they're going to kind of be as wild as possible, like no food, no artificial shelter or anything like that. So kind of what are you looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. The monitoring is absolutely critical in all of this because, of course, this is the first time we're doing it. I mean, we want the area to be as wild as possible, and obviously we're hoping for and planning for an increase in biodiversity and bioabundance for the local area. But we're not doing this as a complete stab in the dark. We have learned a lot of lessons from very, very sort of similar locations in Europe where they have been using bison for maybe 15 years. So it's not like we have a complete unknown and we're just having a go with bison and we've got no idea what's going to happen. It's not that kind of thing at all. We're just making sure that we can test it for the UK and that it works in our context and see what happens in our own woodlands here. So it's a really interesting thing because the site is a site of special scientific interest, and so we have kind of ways in which we monitor species on that site already and habitats on that site. But what we found is that sort of standard method of monitoring is quite static, and it doesn't necessarily allow for natural fluctuations that you would be expecting in a wilder situation, in a site where there are more natural processes going on. In a site with proper natural processes, you will have natural booms and busts of different species. You will have species moving from one area to another and naturally migrating, because you should be having that kind of disturbance within a woodland, which at the moment we can only create through man-made interventions, through chainsaws and things like that. And so that's been a really interesting thing to think about. And so we've kind of designed our monitoring program with 4 things in mind. I'm just going to look at my 4 things because I'm going to forget which we're going to. We've got 4 things we're looking at. We're looking at habitat structure and vegetation dynamics. So we're looking at how the physical structure of the vegetation changed over time. How much scrub have we got? How many trees have we got? That kind of thing. We're also looking at, obviously, at biodiversity and bioabundance. Biodiversity, I think your viewers will all know, and you already know, is that kind of diversity of all different living things. But bioabundance is a slightly different concept. It's about the actual mass of living things that live there. Because if you're just measuring different number of different species, you could miss how many of those individual species there actually are, and whether they're actually declining or increasing. If you look at the studies that have shown sort of most recently the most alarming things about the insect declines over time, which have been happening in various different studies, particularly one in Germany, showed that there'd been a really long-term decline in just the weight of insects over time. That idea of cleaning your windscreen when driving through roads in the summer from bugs, and that has really declined. The windscreen phenomenon is something we've done a lot of work on recently at Kemp Wildlife Trust. And so we're going to be measuring that kind of how much insect life is there on the site, for example. We hope that the bison should have a really positive impact on that. The other thing is just looking at natural processes themselves. Are things like, is there enough deadwood on site? Is decomposition happening in the right kind of way? Measuring those kind of things. And then also there are the things like ecosystem services and natural capital. is a naturally functioning woodland able to sequester more carbon, for example, than a woodland that is just plantation? And lots of other studies have already shown that that is the case. We want to see what the bison impact on that is. That's things like, studying the soil and how that's functioning as well. So there's quite a big scope of monitoring that's going on, because we want to be able to see the change wherever it is happening. This is the idea of, because we don't have an entirely fixed idea of what will happen in the end, we know that the woodland will change over time. We know that we will continue to manage the sort of the protected species that are there, but we need to see where the change is wherever it happens. And so that's why we've got such a comprehensive monitoring program in place.
And so with the bison themselves, there's quite an interesting question that pops up here, because obviously the jury is slightly still out, as I understand it, about whether European bison were actually ever present in the UK. So we've got lots of evidence for steppe bison, which are an extinct species. But do you anticipate bringing these European bison back, which are obviously completely well suited to most European temperate habitats? Do you think that will have a different impact on a native UK woodland, a native British woodland, as it would to somewhere in Europe, say, was it the Netherlands, where they've also done kind of like bison engineering? Do you anticipate any kind of difference in that regard, just because the species might not, or a close relative was the one which we had here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's an interesting one, and I suppose slightly academic in one way, because the steppe bison, if we still had steppe bison, that would be fantastic. It would be a very simple solution. We'd bring those steppe bison, we'd use those steppe bison, but we don't have them. So we are having to use whatever the closest analogue is that we currently still have, because species are going extinct over time, all the time at the moment. And so the European bison is the closest living relative to the steppe bison. There is still, we don't know for definite that the European bison wasn't here. There's not been any fossil evidence that it was here, but that's not to say that they weren't here.
Yeah,
so they are the closest living relative that we still have. We know that they are, the way that they feed and behave has a certain impact on the environment. For example, they will eat bark where other cattle species won't. They have a good proportion of bark in their diet, especially during winter, and that has the effect of kind of ring barking trees so that they selectively die off and leave that standing deadwood, which is really valuable habitat and something that we have a real lack of in UK woodlands, because it's just not something that we manage for very well. And so we know what the kind of behaviours that bison have, and so what those impacts will be on a woodland. The species present in those Dutch woodlands are still very much similar species compositions to we have here. So no, I don't expect there to be a huge difference between what happens there and what happens here. But of course, we'll be monitoring that very, very closely to see what the impacts will be.
And so you've mentioned sort of the wild populations in the Netherlands. Is that where the bison are going to come from? I wasn't sure where. I kind of saw Poland or Netherlands as kind of the source of the bison.
There are kind of two different ways in which we can get bison for the project. There's the European Endangered Species Recovery Programme, which has a kind of a stud book, because the bison are an endangered species in their own right, or vulnerable species in their own right. And so they actually declined, well, they completely went extinct in the wild nearly 100 years ago, where they actually reduced down to 54 individuals. And so at that point, they all got brought into captivity. And then I think it's only 18 pairs of they're actually bred. So they went through this really severe genetic bottleneck. And so the breeding now, in order to make sure that they don't have too many genetic issues, is very carefully managed. And that European Endangered Species Recovery Programme manages all that breeding quite carefully, puts together the right animals so that we can continue to have that kind of genetic diversity. And so that's one way that we can go down to source those animals. They have animals in various projects all across Europe. There's one other as well, sort of Arc Nature, that have the extensive grazing projects in the Netherlands. They also have bison in a sort of separate stud book program as well, so we could source bison from there. The key thing for us, because there are only limited numbers of populations of bison in Europe. We kind of know where they all are.
Yeah.
There's not that many people involved in working out where these bison go.
There's no hidden bison.
Yeah, it's making sure that those bison are a functioning herd before they arrive. The last thing we want to do is put a bunch of individual bison that have never met each other before into a foreign site. They don't know where they are. They wouldn't necessarily know how to behave with each other. They wouldn't necessarily know how to find food. But if we can find a herd and we can make sure that we get a herd that are used to foraging for their own food, they know how to interact with each other, they've got a strong kind of matriarchal unit going on, then we can just bring that herd in its entirety over to the UK, and that way they can get on with the job of being bison and can get into their natural behaviours as quickly as possible.
So how many animals are you looking to bring over? So obviously bison herd numbers are quite flexible, as I understand. There's a bit of fission fusion going on. How many animals are you thinking will suit in Wilder Blean?
As I said, the critical thing is that they are a functioning herd unit. So there's some flexibility in the actual amount of numbers, but we're talking less than 10. We're talking probably 6 or 7 animals, something like that. One bull and a matriarchal female, and then some younger cows with her too. So we're talking a small number of bison. The idea being that they will have roughly 200 hectares to roam in. This is an incredibly low stocking density. We're starting really, 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 really low. And that means that those bison can breed naturally over time, which is better for their kind of natural function, doing their natural behaviours, getting on with being bison. And that way we can grow that population slowly, and we can move animals off-site as and when that population grows.
That sounds fantastic, and we could get some native-born bison back in the UK for the first time. That would be incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, we're kind of paving the way, and bison breed relatively slowly. So we've got some time to work this out in terms of when we won't reach capacity on the site for a good number of years, and by that time, hopefully other UK-based projects will be there waiting for bison to come along, so we can have a UK-based program of bison being moved around. But if not, there are other projects in Europe that need bison all the time, because, as I say, that breeding is being carefully managed across the whole continent. So yeah.
So this isn't a case of when the bison reach too many, they'll just kind of like overflow into Canterbury. They're going to be quite carefully moved from A to B as and when needed, and it's all very kind of under control in that regard.
Yeah, very much so. And one thing that's really fascinating, and we learned from the projects in the Netherlands, they have these incredible corral systems, handling systems for these bison, of which we're going to get one ourselves. We're having it designed and built, which the bison get used to. They're sort of left open when they're not in use, and the bison are able to freely wander in and out, and they get used to this corral area. And it's not some kind of scary roundup kind of process. And in the Netherlands, they've actually shown that they round up these bison, or they get them into the corral very, very gently over a period of time, and they can actually now move bison from one project to another without the need for any sedation or anything like that. They're kept very, very calm. They load them into the back of the lorry, and they transport them from one site to another, and they're very, very calm. They're very docile animals, actually. They're not kind of very scary in terms of, like a bull or something like that. They're actually quite docile creatures. So it's really brilliant from the kind of welfare point of view that we now have these systems in place, and we've learned from those projects that we can manage those animals without causing them undue stress or using undue medication. So yeah,
that sounds incredible.
Yeah, no, for an animal that large, because they can be like 800 kilos, to be able to like move them safely and kind of not cause issues, that's brilliant. That is kind of a gentle way to move them.
Yeah, definitely. It's very clever. It's all kind of cow psychology. A lot of this was learned from Temple Grandin, absolutely fantastic kind of pioneer of cattle movement in the US, and this idea of tapering corridors. Basically, the corridors get narrow and they go around corners, so the bison never see the end. They just go gently around the corner, and they continue, and they just stay calm, and they just move in this kind of way until they get to the safely into their truck, and then they move on, let go in the next project.
Tapering corridors sounds like some dreams I've been having recently. It's a bit close to home. So in this woodland, it won't just be bison. Could you tell us a bit about some of the other species you've got happening here? Obviously, the UK woodlands at the moment are completely bereft in terms of large megafauna and these large animals which can, change the environment. So what else is going on in the woodland?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got as I sort of mentioned, we've got these three different treatments, I suppose you call them, scientific treatments that's going to happen. The woodland as a whole is sort of 500 hectares, give or take. The bison will be in separate fenced linked areas, all one kind of unit that meanders around, of about 200 hectares. And the bison will be in there with Exmoor ponies and Iron Age pigs. I'll mention that in a bit more. Then in another sort of 260 hectares, which is kind of the rest of the main bit of the site, which will have a fence all the way around it, but people can freely wander around on footpaths. That will have longhorn cattle, Exmoor ponies, and again these Iron Age pigs too. The pigs are actually able to move between the different areas, so that's one population of pigs. They're not separate. They can move out in and out of the bison areas. And then separate to that, we have another 100 hectares, which is completely separate and is just a woodland undergoing traditional management and has no animals in it at all. So what we're really testing is the difference between the bison's behaviour and what that has when it's in this kind of mixed assemblage to what domesticated cattle can do. And so we're really trying to see what the different behaviours there are. We know that in terms of the domestic cattle, they're great at things like browsing twigs and creating and sort of pulling down branches with their horns, and that can kind of create a nice sort of haloing effect around some trees and bring some light in. But we don't think that they will really eat very much bark off trees. That's quite a different process, and a bison has a lot more strength behind it, and they can actually kind of rub up against trees and occasionally fell trees that are already kind of on their way out. So create a bit more light, a bit more quickly, we imagine. Mm-hmm. Bison also do a lot more dust bathing than other cattle species, where they roll around on their backs. It's also a bit of a territorial display. And that can create these lovely kind of dust baths, which are fantastic for burrowing insects and create sort of linked areas of habitat, which then other smaller species can benefit from. Small mammals and things like that, and lizards and that kind of thing can move between these little corridors through the different things. So we're really testing these different things. But what we've also found that with kind of Exmoor ponies, we've used ponies in the Blean in the past, but they're just not able to kind of penetrate into that really dense vegetation. They can't make that impact in a mature woodland. They're very good at areas which have already been cleared, then kind of keeping those a bit more open, but they just can't. They don't have the equipment to kind of tackle those bigger trees, whereas a bison can. And so between the two of them, they kind of do this lovely kind of tag team effect, and they've already sort of shown this in the Netherlands, where the bison can go in and make a bit of room, and that way then the ponies have got more availability for food to come through. And actually, although you might think that more animals on site might mean less food for each animal, they actually, by working in this way, create their own kind of food sources over time. So the benefits for the welfare for the ponies are actually benefited by the bison as well. That's what we're looking to see. That by they create this more availability of niches and more availability of food for those horses to then come in afterwards. It's also great to be able to use the Exmoor ponies being a native breed to the UK. It's it's protecting that breed and enabling that to sort of last for future generations as well. So it's really nice that we can use things that are UK based as well as bringing in European bison.
And so with the Iron Age pigs, one question I had: why are you using Iron Age pigs instead of wild boar? Because one would think that wild boar, going back even further, would have more of an engineering impact. I mean, is it potentially because they might escape and go a bit bonkers?
yeah, it's more of a practical reason and slightly a legal one, really. Iron Age pigs are a hybrid of wild boar bred with a domestic pig, usually a Tamworth pig, but not exclusively. And that means that they are a domesticated species. They're not quite as prone to kind of jumping or escaping as a wild boar is, but also they're not considered a dangerous wild animal. A boar is considered a dangerous wild animal, and so the requirements for sort of fencing those boar in are much tighter, and you can't have people in with wild boar. You would be responsible for those wild boar. You couldn't have them roaming across footpaths and that kind of thing. Then if you think about that, if you're then making a fence around the whole area that is impermeable to those wild boar, that is a real super duper maximum strength fence, you're then barricading that site from all other types of wildlife that might be able to move in and out, foxes and badgers and mammals and things like that. And so we don't want to isolate this woodland from all other impacts. We want these animals to be working in tandem with native wildlife that's already there and present on site. And so whilst we will be making sure that our Iron Age pig species are not able to get out, we make sure we have fencing that is able to do that. It's not the same requirement as you have for a wild boar. It also means that people can more easily access the woodland and enjoy the footpaths without so much fencing required for that too. So it's a bit of a practical reason, but actually those Iron Age pigs can do just as fantastic a job on the environment. They have strong, powerful necks for that rooting behaviour, turning over soil and creating those kind of availability for seeds to then germinate in those spaces. So we're really excited to see what the pigs can do. Also, we're talking about a very, very small number of pigs here, and we're not going to allow them to breed on site. We're just going to have female pigs because the territory for a male boar of a pig, is a male pig, is very, very large, and the site, even on such a large site as this, a boar could still roam a very, very long distance. And so we're just going to have female pigs, and we're talking, maybe 6 pigs in a site that is, 500 units. So you'll probably never see a pig, unfortunately, but you should see their.
No, I guess that just goes to show kind of even if you have only a couple of animals under the right kind of management and kind of scientific evidence of how they can manage landscapes, you don't need that many. People might think you need whole groups of pigs or bison, but you only need a couple.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is all about getting that level right, about getting that kind of assemblage just right for the environment. And that's one of the reasons we're starting small, so we can see when it gets to a right level and that we can manage and hold it to that level when we need to. The last thing, we've learned a lot of lessons from the past, and we'll not allow these animals to get to a point where they're sort of starving or having any welfare issues at all. We do very careful body condition scoring, so we can monitor these animals from a distance, and there's set protocols in place that already govern this, and we know how to do that, so that we can watch those animals from a distance, not have to intervene if we don't need to, but ensure that the animals are just staying at a level that is right for the site and that is having the best impacts on the site, but also the best impacts on the welfare of those animals too.
So you mentioned the welfare kind of aspect. Is that something that's going to be taken on by the Kemp Wildlife Trust, or is that more Wildwood? Because I know there's the collaboration there. Is that kind of more their side of the management?
That's a good question. I should have mentioned that up front, really. Yes, this is a partnership project. This is absolutely sort of the fusing of expertise from these two different organisations that have really, really complementary skills. Wildwood, their actual site, their nature park is right on the edge of West Blean. It's just fantastically situated right on the edge of this woodland, and they already have 2 European bison in captivity there. Those bison are zoo bison. They're not suitable for using in the wild, so they will not be coming onto our site. But it means that they have all of this experience in managing bison and managing dangerous wild animals in a captive setting. And so they take on this kind of the responsibility and the animal handling processes and that kind of thing for the bison. And this marries really, really nicely with Kemp Wildlife Trust's reserve-based expertise, ecosystem kind of expertise as well. And so that we can link all those two things together to make sure that we're making the best of everybody's experiences and make the project a success.
That sounds incredible. And I guess, to go back, again, with the bison and with the pigs and with the ponies, it kind of, is the message you're trying to send that it's actually less about the species and more about the ecosystem services? So it doesn't matter that it's not boar or steppe bison, because it's the services that these analogues are providing. Is that kind of what the Blean project is trying to do, trying to kickstart these services again?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. The animals are there to do a job. They're not there to just be because we think, bison are cool, although bison are really cool.
Very cool.
But we do it's all about the functions that those animals can provide, and we've looked very carefully at the different kind of breeds that are available and what might work in this kind of environment, and we're really keen to get those functions in place. You have that rooting behavior of the pigs, you have that ability for bison to strip bark off trees, creating these dust baths, the ponies to be able to come in and take out the smaller vegetation too, and all working together, it should create this fantastic environment. So yeah.
No, just saying how exciting it is, kind of, that this is something that's actually becoming a reality, that the bison are going to come in about 2 years' time, and kind of all the planning that's going on. It's just, it's a very, very exciting project.
And obviously we're super excited about this because we're animal nerds. But in such a kind of mixed rural landscape with houses and farmland and so close to Canterbury, what's been the number one concern that people have had about? Because I'm sure there have been many. So what's like the biggest thing you've had to kind of reassure people about or work around?
It really depends on the type of person. It's not been one major thing really. For example, one of the things that has come up a couple of times was I suppose the risk of disease to domestic livestock. So people who are farming with cattle in the area were concerned about how are these animals being managed and what might the impacts be there on kind of potential for disease in their livestock. And it was really that was something that we could explain to them quite straightforward. Basically, the animals that we have here will be subject to the same rules and restrictions that we have for all the rest of animals that you keep as livestock in the UK. So they will be TB tested, they will go through quarantine, they will be vaccinated when they come onto site. The only difference is we won't be, preventatively medicating these animals when they're on site, because we want those animals to have a natural, healthy gut, so that the dung they're producing can then be used by dung beetles and all those other things and then invertebrates and all sorts of things that can use that dung. And that has a really beneficial impact on the environment. But that doesn't mean that we won't treat those animals with medicines if they are sick. Those animals we would then take into that corral system. We can medicate them, wait for all that to pass through the system, wait for that to all come through, and then release them back onto site. So we're not having that sort of build up of pesticides in the environment. So by explaining that we're governed by the same welfare restrictions as farmers, governed by those same things, we were able to kind of explain that there's not an increased risk from us bringing these animals on site. That was the main one. The other ones have been about sort of safety, but when we've explained our fencing situation and the fact that there won't be any public footpaths going into places with bison, people have been quite happy about that. We're hoping that we will be able to have supervised tours into the bison area once the bison are settled and ready, but we're not going to rush into that. That will be once we've decided that is safe and that the bison are happy and secure in their areas. But under supervised access. Interestingly, in the Netherlands, they have unsupervised access through bison areas through near to quite dense urban populations outside the city of Haarlem in the Netherlands. They've got a permissive route that runs through, and people can self-guided can go through with the bison quite happily, and they've not had any problems at all. So they are very docile creatures. It's just about giving them that kind of that respect and that distance.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's about changing perceptions as well. I could think, because people in people's lifetime, they won't have lived alongside bison. They may be unsure if they are aggressive, if they are dangerous. So I think it's fantastic that you guys are kind of maybe trying to change perceptions about these incredible animals.
Yeah, very much so. We are in the UK. We're very used to being the biggest thing out there. We're very used to being in control of the environments in which we go in. But it leads to us being firstly quite disconnected from the nature, for realizing how reliant we are on the ecosystem services it provides from this nature to be working for us as well, that we're not ultimately in control. We are dependent on those environments, and hopefully by bringing those animals in here and understanding that you have to respect them, you have to let them do their own thing, let them be behaving the way they want to be behaving, changes the way that you view nature quite fundamentally, and can make you see that you are a piece of this puzzle, not ultimate master of it. We have this kind of strange idea in the UK about nature is completely reliant on us. We have this idea of things like where we see species now is exactly where they're supposed to be. So, for example, we have this concept of something called a farmland bird. Lots of species are called farmland birds, and they are reliant on that farmland. But what did all those species do before we had farmland?
Yeah.
They all lived somewhere. They all lived in a different type of landscape. Perhaps we forced them into that farmland because there's no other available opportunities for them. We still need to now protect that farmland and make sure it's working in the way for those species. I'm not saying that we should stop doing that, but that's not the only way to manage those species. It's not that we have created the habitats that those species want. We've just destroyed the other habitats that they also would like to live in. So there's a big story to tell here about people respecting nature and about being involved in it.
And I think that's almost, potentially as valuable to people as the ecological processes that this project will hope to kickstart. If you can just get that little bit, baby steps, little group of people at a time, if you can reignite that little connection that so many of us have lost, and that sense of, oh, maybe I should be a bit more careful when walking through this woodland. What's that snapping bush over there? I think will be incredibly valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a whole thing here about we're trying to wild the site, but we should also be trying to wild ourselves. People go out of their way to get a buzz, to get some fear into their environment in many different ways. Look at the cues you would get in Alton Towers to go on a roller coaster. Well, what happens if you can walk through a woodland, come across an animal, and think, oh wow, look at that, that's amazing. I'm quite excited, maybe a little bit nervous, but I'm certainly experiencing nature now. Why can't we just get that bit of kind of enjoyment about deeper connection with nature into our woodlands as well? So that's just as big a part of this as the ecological direct benefits as well.
And that's quite a powerful feeling. I mean, me and Emma had a little experience like that. We were looking for wild boar in the Forest of Dean, and we'd gone quite a way off the track. We were sitting down to put a camera trap up, and we heard this massive crashing coming behind us. And we thought, oh my God, we're going to get charged by a wild boar. And we kind of scattered, looked for a tree to climb up, and it was this tiny little fawn bouncing along. But in that moment, you're reminded of where you are in the food chain, and I think it was quite a humbling experience. I would have thought. I mean, I don't know if you agree, Emma. Like just sitting there thinking,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I need to be on it now.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I think it's looking forward to kind of seeing where this goes with Wilder Blean as well. If maybe people can be more connected to the natural world, because I think that disconnect has caused a kind of a lack of care. That people, if they are disconnected from the natural world, they're going to be maybe less willing to conserve it and want to protect it going into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about the kind of health and well-being benefits from being out in nature. It's been shown that, not all green space is equal. That the wilder a place is, the more nature that there is in that space, the better it is for your health and well-being. There are several studies showing this now. And so we need to just try to cram as much nature into these sites as we possibly can.
And speaking of that kind of that element of people not caring about our natural spaces, is there any anticipation that there might be quite a negative reaction to the bison once they're there? Like, how will you keep the bison safe potentially from us, from dogs, or from people who might get a bit too close, or people who might actually want to harm them? I mean, I don't know if they exist, but you can imagine it.
Yeah, it's something we do have to consider very carefully. Obviously, a bison is a very large animal. I would not advise anybody to try to go right up to a bison, for example. I think that would be not a good idea. But But we thought about it very carefully. The bison will actually be in a double fenced enclosure. So they're not just behind one fence, they're behind two fences, and that's within our site. And then we have a third fence which goes all the way around the edge of the whole project itself.
Mm-hmm.
So those bison, the fence that we need to hold a bison in is actually just a fairly normal electric fence. Something about kind of 4 foot high, something like that, with electric fence permanently on around them, and that's very sufficient to hold the bison in that area, so long as they've got all that they need in that area, which is being carefully managed. But what we then have subsequent to that, outside of that, about 3 meter distance from that, is a much bigger fence, which is very much designed as it's secondary to containment for the bison, but really it's to prevent people and dogs from going into that enclosure. That's the main fence, and that's a much bigger fence, a taller fence with sort of wire netting on it as well to stop people being able to go into the bison area. So I've thought about that quite carefully. Whilst bison are docile around people, dogs could be a bigger risk. They've not had huge problems with this in the Netherlands projects, but we don't really want to run that risk, and so we will be managing that quite carefully. Along with this is we will have 24/7 presence on site. We will have bison rangers, which we're looking to hire very, very soon. It'll be the first bison rangers in the
Cool.
UK. Very interesting.
Can I apply?
That you can. And we can, by having that presence on site, there'll be a lot of visitor engagement going on. There'll also be things like signage at entrance points as well. But the main thing is that we'll be on site talking to people and teaching people about how to behave around these animals and how to behave on site. Definitely dogs on leads on site. That will be a must. That way everybody can enjoy the site and see the animals doing what they're doing.
Mind you, I'm sure they'll be fine because I kind of pity the Jack Russell that tries to have a go at a bison. So
yeah, I don't think I think it would just be. I don't think nobody wants to get their dog into trouble. Nobody wants to cause upset to these animals either. So it's a natural thing to just keep your dog on the lead, and that way people can be enjoying the site. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I don't know how long we're meant to keep going with this.
I was going to say maybe we don't want to take too much of your time, but I think it's really, really good insight into hearing more about the project and how it's going to unfold in the next few years.
No problem. And once we're up and running and we've got the bison on site, we'll be very pleased to have you guys down, and you can come and visit and maybe do an on-site podcast too. That'd be great.
We will absolutely
we'd love
come
to
down.
see them.
We are bison maniacs.
Yeah, I think we're going to wrap up now. That was a fantastic conversation with Stan Smith, and just thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about the project. And I think Roby and I are both incredibly excited to see where this goes, and the opportunity of coming to visit when the bison do arrive. So thanks so much.
Thank you both very, very much. I should just say a massive thanks also to the People's Postcode Lottery Dream Fund, without that we would not be able to do this project. So it's been a massive bonus for us to have this funding to be able to make this a reality for everybody. If people want to find out more, they can find us on www.kempwildlifetrust.org.uk/Wilder Blean, or just put in the hashtag Wilder Blean to any of your favourite social medias, and you'll be able to find us on there. We'll be giving lots of updates on those kind of things. Join our mailing list,
Fantastic. Thank you so much. You've made our little bison nerd hearts very happy by getting to talk to us about bison in the UK, finally. Absolutely check out the Wilder Blean project. I just tapped in Bison Kent and it came up, so that's amazing. We will talk to you next time on the Biome Podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening, guys. That was our lovely interview with Stan Smith, who is the Wilder Landscape Manager at the Kent Wildlife Trust, and he was telling us lots and lots of awesome facts about the Wilder Blean project to reintroduce European bison to the UK, which is amazing.
Ooh, it's so exciting.
Yeah, it was really nice for us because we're massive bison nerds, and we were talking to someone who actually works with them and is planning this whole massive ecological project with them. So it was really, really exciting. Absolutely check out the Kemp Wildlife Trust online or the Wilder Blean project. Literally just tap it into Google and you'll find it. And Emma?
Yeah, and if you want more updates about sort of the Biome podcasts, please subscribe to Grizzly's YouTube channel, and you can also check out more updates on the Instagram as well, which is at Biome by Grizzly. And if you want to check us out, because we have cool wildlife content, and probably we're going to go on a massive bison tangent now.
Oh yeah, bison for days.
But I'm Emma Hodson Wildlife on Instagram, and Roby is at Roby Watkinson Wildlife. So yeah, thanks so much for listening. That was a fantastic interview, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Bye.